revision questions. Let's do that. I'm full of false promises. I'm going to make you a mega quiz. I'm going to take questions, random questions from the quizzes we already have, and depending on how enthusiastic I am, I might add some new ones, because I think it's now time for you to test yourself without necessarily knowing what topic you're being tested on. Who's there? Oh, look, everybody's coming in. Who's that? Aisha, nice to see you. Erin, Maria, Ken. I assume that's Ken.
Hi, Kath.
Hey, nice to hear your voice. Are you feeling a bit better?
Yes, a bit better, thank you.
Good to hear. I've gone downhill today. Stephen, you're in the reading room. People would think that you don't ever go home. I'm a little worried that security will come and get you one day because you're always there. And I've just realised I am proudly wearing my hoodie from a different university. Should I change before I turn the recording on? Oh, it's actually recording now, but I'll just try and not show. Hey, you're in a law class. Melbourne Business School doesn't teach law degrees. We'll be fine. So, but hey, I signed up for the merch at some point. Okay. So what do we want to do today? Actually, let me just stop, make a point, wave my arms, because that messing around beforehand I won't include in the recording. So welcome everybody. Officially, this is our last tute. In reality, it won't be our last tute, I'm sure. I will be around next Sunday before the face-to-face exam, and I will continue to be around until you lovely students online have finished your exams as well. But basically the way these tutes are supposed to work is we start with your questions, and if you don't have any, then I ask you questions. So is there anything that anybody would like to start with today? Anything in particular? Steve looks like he's having trouble connecting into us. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm having some trouble. I'll give you a sec. I'll play catch up.
That's okay. All good. All right. I'm also happy to talk about the most recent assignment, although I'm not really sure how useful that is to you. Maybe just as we're doing examples, I might draw from the assignment to talk about that. I basically shared the stats. Overall, I was pretty happy with it. It was a pretty hard assignment, I've got to say. Range of marks was broader. Had a few people fail this time around. That was largely, in most cases, that was impacted by late submission as well. So, but that was not the only factor. Some really good responses. About 45% of you got a better mark on this assignment than you did on the first one, which I'm really happy with, because there's a significant lift between the first and the second assignment. I need to remind you that your first assignment, your exam, the questions won't be nearly as difficult. And I think you're probably seeing that if you're looking at past exams. So I have a question here from Erin. So Sharisha, in fact, the questions from Sharisha, and Sharisha asked me lots of questions. I hope that she hasn't somehow been shamed out of asking them in some way. So in regards to the 5 and 10 mark questions, how many words would be appropriate? Too little, too much? Okay, this time, as I mentioned when I gave you the outline for the assignment, this time you've only got 4 questions, and each question is worth 25%. I would not think about words. If anybody's going and counting words, you're not really doing what you need to be doing in an assignment. I would think about it as time. 25% of your time on each question is what I'm expecting. And I would be thinking the smart money would be on people who allowed a bit of catch-up time. So rather than thinking of it as 30 minutes a question, I would think maybe 25 minutes a question. A minute a mark is usually a pretty good guide. And then that will allow you another 20 minutes at the end if something went wrong and it turned out it took you a bit longer than you thought it was on one of them, or to go back, highlight cases, to just because we do something and then we're doing something else, and a little bit of the thinking music part of our brain, that's an official scientific term, by the way, thinking music part of the brain. But the thinking music part of your brain will actually be still working on a problem you did earlier. You know, almost always, this is completely anecdotal. I have no scientific data to support this, but I reckon I could get it. I think most people do best on the third question that they answer in an exam. When I'm going, oh, you know, on the third half hour. So you've got 2 hours. So if I'm thinking about it as quarters, 25%, most people seem to do best in the stuff that they're doing second last. Why do I say that? I often see people run out of time on the last thing, although they often do some quite good quality work there. Again, the smart people usually leave the thing that they think is hardest till last and do the thing that they think they're going to do the best on first. But because even though it's a pressure cooker situation and you're answering stuff that you're comfortable with early on, you've already read the questions, so you're thinking about them, and so you tend to actually do really well when you finish the first hour of the exam and before you get to the next. So that's what I'm seeing. So again, don't think about it in terms of words, think about it in terms of time, and be prepared to draw a line. Even if you're doing awesome and you think you can continue doing better, don't risk not answering a question. And so if you allow yourself sort of 25 minutes and then you move on to the next question, at the end, if everything is going well, you'll have 20 minutes to come back and pad out, fill out, find more references for the questions that you feel really comfortable, but you will know that you've completed the 4 questions. Another question here, is it the same for OUA as face-to-face? You have got exactly the same problem, same contract. The problems are different, but the setup is exactly the same. I am the world's laziest workaholic. So I've tried to invest my time so I'm not wasting yours, so that any hints and tips and tricks that I give one group are equally valid for the other. So that's why I've set up the exam in that way. I then also got the question, would parties proceed with an unenforceable contract instead of the parties redoing the contract, ensuring it's enforceable? I think I understand that question. Or why would parties proceed with an unenforceable contract? If parties wanted to go ahead and there was no dispute between them, technically it doesn't matter whether a court would enforce the contract or not. Just the fact that it's whether or not, sorry, let me put that another way. Whether or not a contract is enforceable is really only relevant if there is a dispute and one or more of the parties is seeking to get a court to enforce the contract for them. If the parties are in heated agreement as to what it is that they want to do, then it doesn't matter whether a court would support it or not. As long as they're not disagreeing, commercially it makes no sense. So that's commercially why. Having said that, it would be very, very, very unwise for a lawyer to say to the client, this is not an enforceable arrangement, but it's not doing you any harm, so leave it as it is, unless you were absolutely sure it was short term. So let me give you an example, actually using the second assignment that you've all just done. One of the things that made that assignment really tricky is that one of the biggest issues you really had to address was intention. But it was abundantly clear that both sides wanted to do the deal. So you can see objectively that you've got 2 parties that want to do a deal. One party who wants to sell, one party who wants to buy. They're in a region in relation to price. So what it required you to do, and the good students were able to do this, is distinguish between the preliminary agreement, which was setting up an arrangement under which they could finalise their negotiations to go to a a sale and purchase agreement, and the agreement to sell and purchase the shares itself. And so the preliminary agreement, what they were agreeing on were things like, well, one would think or hope that they were agreeing on things like, let's keep it confidential. Let's agree a general price range, perhaps. And I don't think it did this particularly well. There was a number in there, not necessarily a range. And the kinds of things that the purchaser will explore. It's sort of touched upon this idea that the price might be adjusted, but didn't do very much with that. So you're in this tricky situation where you've got two parties who clearly want to enter into an agreement, but they hadn't, and you know, the cat's out of the bag now. You've all submitted, or you should have, that at that stage, they hadn't actually reached what an agreement that a court would enforce, even though both of them were intending to reach an agreement at some point. And so that's an example where it could be if no lawyers got involved and they didn't realise, and they ended up not disputing anything, they might have muddled through without an enforceable agreement and still ended up with a sale and purchase of shares at the end. So hopefully that question came from Ken. You're unmuted, actually. Did that answer your question, Ken?
Yeah, it did.
Yay. I don't have your picture. I've got no body language at all. I've got nothing. Although I got to say, you're pretty good at looking at me in class in a way that makes me think that I've not explained things. So, but you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, next question I have here is, if we are inciting cases, sorry, I said inciting cases. Sorry, I'm liking the idea of a riot that's incited by cases, kind of like a rap battle or something. Anyway, sorry, pay attention, Catherine. If we are citing cases in the exam, would it be enough to say Gibson and Manchester City Council, or do we need to cite the full case? Absolutely enough to have the name. Okay, the only time where I even really need a year or a number is, and we haven't really come across them very often in this class, is if you had 2 or 3 versions with the same name and you wanted to make it clear whether you were talking about the appeal or first instance or something like that. Don't think it's really going to be a big issue here. I am absolutely interested in what you think in this exam. It's an open book exam, so it's really easy for you to get the detail right. And I'm not going to reward you for getting the detail right. What I'm looking for is that you can identify what the right case is. I think a good way to think about it, and again, I want to caution you, my approach to exams may or may not be the same as everybody else's. So always check this with your other lecturer. Some of them might want something completely different. But I think the best exam answers for my money are as if you were preparing comprehensive notes to go into a meeting. I'm not as fussed about verbs and flowing paragraphs and getting things in the right order. If you've got bullet points and you've got a reference, and cases will trump the textbook, but if you've only got the textbook, throw that in. Although, quite frankly, if you've only got the textbook reference and you can't actually look to see what the footnotes are, what cases you're pointing at, like, you're not really trying. But get them in there. If you decide that the order would make more sense, just number it. Show me what order I need to read it. Use arrows, do what you like. So I've suggested a couple of times, write every second line, only write on one page. So if you've got on one side of the page, so if you need to, you can add something in on the other side later. Yeah, so Sigrid has heard what I've said before. Awesome. Highlighter as in highlighter pen would be awesome, but, you know, underlining them, putting a box around them. Some people, I've seen people swap colors, like they're writing in blue and then suddenly the cases are in red. It looks lovely, but that to me seems like time that you probably don't need to do. And again, you won't be penalized if you don't highlight the cases. It's just strategically a good thing to do, because everything that you do that makes it easier for me and my colleagues to mark your paper makes it easy for us to see the good things that you've done, the easier it is for us to give you the good marks. Now, hand on heart, I will look. I like to be a good teacher. I don't want anybody to fail, right? So I am looking, but particularly if you're in the middle of the pack and I found everything I need to pass you, if it's hidden away, if it's difficult for me to see that it's there, maybe I look, I hope I would look, but make it as easy for me as possible, okay? Yeah, I like the Friction pens too. They're pretty cool. I've got this plastic notepad that I can write on and then I can just wipe it clean afterwards. It's like saving trees. Yeah, take in spare pens. I don't know how it is. How often does your pen run out of ink? It seems if you are in an exam scenario, the chances of your pen running out of ink are exponentially higher than any other scenario. I've seen it happen so often, people scratching away and, yeah, then suddenly changing colour or, I don't know, just scratching away because they haven't had another pen.
I think it's just Murphy's Law, Kath. I think it's happened to me once where 2 pens actually just didn't work.
Yeah, make sure they work. Have a spare. And, you know, if it's got glitter, why not? Like, I don't know, make yourself, do what you need to do to be happy. There's actually a whole lot of research which has been more related to high school students than anything else. But this research shows that if you practice the way that you need to do the exam, you're likely to do better. So kids who are doing VCE or HSC or whatever it is in the state that you are, if they do practice exams at the same time of day as the exam that they're doing, wearing their school uniform, having a desk with nothing else on it than what they're allowed to have under their exam, if they study under those conditions and study to time, they are more likely to do well in the exam than even, you know, doing it other ways. So I guess what I learned from that, I read that when I was doing my own MBA, is possibly seeing most times that I studied, I would be drinking wine. I should probably go into most exams slightly pissed. But I wouldn't suggest you follow that advice. Okay, next one down. What is the difference between a warranty, a condition, or an intermediate term? And you've kind of answered the question in the question, the effect of breach. So a condition is, in some ways, is a synonym for essential term. So we know in order to have an effective agreement, we need to be able to identify all of the essential terms. So the essential terms are the things without which the contract would make no sense and people would not enter into it. And so we call them essential terms from the point of view of working out what should be in the contract. And when we've identified them, then they become conditions. So, and a condition of the contract, this will be more relevant in your next, in advanced contract. And I know there's a couple of you who are doing advanced contract at the same time. You will have worked out that if there is a breach of a condition, then there are two options for the person who is seeking to, who's claiming breach. They can claim damages. Don't worry about calculating damages or anything like that for this subject, but you can claim damages, or you could seek to terminate the contract. So let me give you an example where sometimes that is an odd result. It is quite often the case that a requirement to do things by a particular time might be a condition or an essential term. So for example, if you are buying a property from me, it will be an essential term that you pay the balance of the purchase price by close of business or midnight on the 30th of the month. If you don't make that payment by that time, then I have the right to terminate the contract, keep the deposit and walk away. Even though actually there's no really effective difference to me receiving the money at 11:59 p.m. or 12:01 p.m. a.m. I should say. But at 12:01 a.m. I can just reject the payment because it's a condition, and I can terminate the contract. So can you see that regardless of what the consequence is, once it's a condition, that's the step that I can take. If we have a warranty, on the other hand, you only have the ability to claim damages. So a warranty it's actually an old-fashioned word that means promise. And breach of warranty is usually, it's a version of a breach of a promise. So often we see warranties as being the kinds of terms and conditions in an agreement that talk about the quality of something. So for example, in second assignment that we've just done, when they finally got to a share sale and purchase agreement, there might be a warranty that the business had an annual turnover of $5 million a year. So, or whatever that number is. And if it turned out that the turnover was $4,900,000, technically there's a breach of that promise, but you work out what the damages are. Now, it might be, if the turnover was zero, if it was a complete lie, of course, if it's a complete lie, we might have misleading or deceptive conduct action. But if it's a complete lie, you might be incensed by that and want to terminate the agreement. But if it's only a warranty, if it's classified as a warranty, you have no right to terminate. Now, of course, the other party might agree with you that you can terminate, but you have no right to terminate. So then we end up with this idea from Hong Kong Fur and other cases of an inanimate term or an intermediate term. So inanimate means, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, it gets caught up in my mouth. It's nominate as in the term, meaning having a name. So in meaning negative, making that negative. So it's a term that is neither a condition nor a warranty. So often, I think just because inanimate is hard to say, intermediate term is what it's often called. So when we've got these terms where it's hard to work out, is it a breach of a condition? Well, it's possibly not a condition, or it would only be a condition in certain circumstances, not all. Or is it a breach of a warranty, but it's bigger than a warranty? What the court will look at is what's the impact of the breach. So the first example I gave you, we had a condition to time where in fact the impact might be tiny. Doesn't matter whether it's tiny or not, you've still got the right to terminate the contract if you want to. With a warranty, might be a really big breach, but you've got absolutely no right. With an intermediate term, what a court will do is say, if a party wants to terminate, they'll say, well, is it a big breach or a little breach? Is it a systemic breach? Have there been so many warranties breached here that there is no contract? So then the court will look at the circumstances to see what is the right remedy. Is it damages or a right to terminate or a combination of the two? So Stephen, that was your question. Does that answer it? I felt like a bit of a rant. Did that raise more questions with anyone else before I get into the list?
I got that, thanks.
Okay, next one down. If we use words directly from the textbook or study guide in an exam, do they need to be referenced or acknowledged? Never hurts to reference or acknowledge. So, and also might save you copying out big swags. I'm looking for your own words as much as possible. But if you were to say, refer to the textbook and say in paragraph, and use the same square bracketing, 12.59 of the textbooks, they explore blah, blah, blah in some detail. And the most important thing is blah. So I think blah, 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 that's perfect. Only without the blah, blah, blahs, I'm not Charlie Brown's mum. So don't waste too much time trying to quote something perfectly. The more often that you reference something, particularly if you compare it back then to the cases that it's come from, the stronger that will be, because it's your words with the credibility of some pretty well-respected authors and, you know, some guys who got to sit on the High Court and wear wigs. Any written materials in exam? Are there any written materials you can't bring in? Okay, I'll go to the next one. If it's in writing, you can bring anything in. The stuff you can't bring in is electronic, okay? So any physical stuff, I don't care if it's, you know, written on your arm, written on your clothing, written on toilet paper, written on pieces of paper. You don't have to worry about any of that bizzo, but you can't bring in a tablet or a phone or anything else. You cannot phone a friend. You cannot talk to anybody. So the electronic transactions definition of writing or data doesn't apply to exam invigilators.
No, my question was really around sometimes there's rules, has to be bound or only a textbook or only a tabbed book.
Nah, you can bring in your entire library if you want, as long as it's not electronic.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and if anybody tries to stop you, you just give them my number and they've got it anyway, and I will read them the riot act.
Cool.
But because they can be quite so, and yeah, they can be quite officious, but that just helps you remember the officious bystander, because that's who they are, right? Yeah. And the second part of that question, what remedies to breach of different term types? I'm sorry, I don't understand that question. What remedies?
I've lost my click. I'm not using it. I've lost it. Oh, there's so many questions now.
It's right. It's the very last one. I feel like I've got. What remedies to breach of different term types?
I think you covered that. Yeah, no, sorry, no. That was I was asking before. It was warranties, conditions, terms. So express terms, implied terms. Is there any implications on each of that? No?
Firstly, this subject doesn't really deal with remedies.
Yeah.
So you can just and in fact, that's often where people go wrong, is they get too caught up in what the remedy might be, and you haven't studied it, so you get it wrong. And so it's just like, if there's a contract, yes, no. If there's a contract, then remedies might be available, and I'll hand that over to Dennis Tenuto to ask the question.
I'm happy if your answer is it's out of scope. I'll leave it alone. Thanks.
Yeah, but I will, because I can't help it, I will come back. Whether it's an implied term or an express term won't make any difference to whether it's a remedy or not. The classification there is condition, intermediate, warranty. They will go to remedies. Okay. Everybody's gone quiet. That's good. Good list of questions there. Ask more, but I might go now to a slide pack. Let me just, actually, I wonder how this one's going to work in the room. Let's see. Okay, I've got to work out how to, sorry. Slideshow, turn it down to my primary monitor, do that. Hide that away, share screen. I am assuming now that you can see a lovely slide pack that has a range of different random pop culture or other references on it. Your task, any one of you can do this, is just pick one of those and it's going to take us to a question. Otherwise, I will.
Wait.
You have a choice between...
Telephone.
Telephone. Let's go to the telephone. Somebody's just joined us. Explain, drawing on common law principles, how a contract is formed between a telecommunications company and a customer for a mobile phone. Refer to each of the elements in contract formation in your answer and illustrate your points by reference to case law. This is a fairly standard question that you might come across. What I now want each of you to do is stop panicking, Rita. It's okay.
You see my face.
You're the only face. You and Stephen are the only faces I can see. All right, quickly, grab a pen. How much time am I going to give you to do this? Okay, you got 60 seconds. Quickly, make some notes. Let's talk it through.
Wait, how do we see the question again?
I will go back to it. Oh, and then here we go. This is why it works better in the classroom when I have copies of them. Just give you a minute or two. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, let's work this through. I know you haven't had enough time. You will have this. In fact, this slide pack is available for you in the week 12 materials, and it might be useful to you, particularly those of you who are studying in groups, to just have a go at just seeing how you can put these kind of questions together. So, all right, let's talk it through. Where do you start?
At the beginning.
At the beginning, it's a very good place to start. So, what is the beginning, Ken?
I'm guessing it's going to be like some type of advert, but is that yeah?
Okay, I think why not? That's a really good place to start. An advertisement. What's an advertisement? Is that an offer?
Invitation to treat.
It's an invitation to treat. What kind of citation might you use to support that? Don't leave him. Come in and help. Aisha, what was that?
Pharmaceutical Society.
That's right. Boots, Cash Chemists and the Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain. Again, if you just called it Pharmaceutical Society in an exam, I would probably work out what you were talking about. Probably easier to spell boots, though. So who then makes the offer?
Customer.
The customer makes the offer. How does the customer make an offer usually?
Submitting an application? No.
Submitting an application, yeah. So there'll be some kind of form which is likely to have terms and conditions on it. Okay, where we now start to stand out in a question like this is we could refer to some legislation that might be relevant to a question like this. What legislation might that be?
Australian consumer law.
Yeah. And we might think about that in the context of, because it's a standard form application, is that going to help you get a little bit closer to which bit of the Australian consumer law you might talk about?
Yes.
Of course, if you have your books in front of you, it makes it a little bit easier. So again, because even though it's an offer that is coming from the customer, the Australian consumer law will say if it's a standard form, then the unfair contracts regime might apply. So, and even though the offer comes from the customer, it's on terms that have already been provided by the telco usually. Okay, so how is the offer accepted? Who accepts the offer? Or what's the next step, I probably should say, which is, I've given it away, acceptance.
It's accepted by the telco.
Yep. And usually that's done through some kind of agent, isn't it? Through the shop assistant, or the even if it's online, it might be done online within some sort of acceptance of notified in some way. So again, a good student doing this, and all of you are good students, but who writing about this kind of scenario might talk about how it's necessary for there to be some notification of the acceptance. What else needs to be in there in order to make sure that we have a binding contract? You're referring to each of the elements. What do you want to refer to next?
Consideration.
Consideration. Actually, just pointing this out, one of the things that I noticed with the second assignment, with particularly some students that were particularly at credit who might have gone to a distinction, or even some distinction students that might have ended up in the high distinction, is there was a bit of a tendency for a lot of people to just go through the elements in the order that we learned them. I think the two most pressing or the most contentious sets of elements in relation to that last assignment were intention and certainty. Yet so many people dealt with them last. So think about it when you're dealing with a contract. Think about the ways that you can talk about the most important things first, particularly if you run out of time. Steve, I can see that you're moving somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've actually suggested to Sigrid, who's about to run out of battery, she might have run out of battery before she saw that she might find you rather than have to go home. So just look out for her.
No issues, I'll go back downstairs, all right? Okay. I had to leave where I was annoying people.
Sorry, now we can see you looking. So consideration, how would you find the consideration in a contract for a mobile phone? What would the consideration be?
Would it be the payment for the contract? The
Oh,
month?
Sigrid, there you are. You're still there.
Yeah, I'm down.
Steve's coming to you.
On mute so I don't give feedback.
I'm going to be controversial here and say no, the payment wouldn't be the consideration. I want you to be really technical here. What is the consideration for the promise to provide services?
The promise to pay for the services.
The promise to pay. So consideration is the price of the promise, and it's almost always another promise in a bilateral contract. Okay, so, and this is where people do tend to, and again, once you start to regularly think like a lawyer, you sort of move on from this. But one of the things that I see students do regularly is get themselves caught up and say, well, they didn't make any payment, so there was no consideration, so there's no contract. But if they promise to pay, the promise to pay is the consideration. Failure to pay is a breach of the contract. Can you see that subtle difference?
Yep.
Okay, other elements. How would we deal with the other elements in a quick little question like this? What are the other elements you might want to talk about?
Intention.
Intention. How would we work out intention in this situation?
Well, it's commercial.
Commercial. So we've got, I'm sorry, I won't tell you, you tell me.
So presumption for it to be legally binding?
Yep. It's unlikely to be a matter that's in dispute. If we have got a human who is signing a piece of paper that says, I promise to pay you this amount of money each month, just the promise itself, consideration and intention are bound up there, particularly when we've got a signature on a form. What cases might you use if you're talking about signatures on forms, even if they hadn't read the form?
The one with the gym lady who threw it in the bin or something,
Yep.
Something like that.
Business first and phone.
That's right.
That's the one.
First and Chong. Probably that's a really good example of it. A more binding authority might be Toll and Alpha Farm. So the rule is actually the rule in Lestrange and Graucob, which is a UK case. But since Toll, it's clearly and Toll was the Fluvax one, where the agent signed a form. And certainty. Of course, all of you understand the detail in your mobile phone contracts, I'm sure. Certainty. What do we work out? What does that mean?
Well,
Help me out.
contains all the essential terms. Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say to others, help you out here because we've put you on the spot.
All of the terms are clear and understood by
So,
both parties.
Contains the essential terms.
yeah, the essential terms, absolutely. And so one of the things that if they're not clear, if they're not, and the language you might use in this context, particularly with a standard form contract, would be if they're not transparent. So you'd be pulling in the unfair contract legislation and saying, okay, what is certainty? Is it in plain language, etc., in relation to the unfair contract terms, if that's relevant? But the certainty, we've got our 3 limbs of certainty. At the end of the day, with a mobile phone contract, the broad brush things we know, I'm going to pay you X number of dollars a month. You're going to ensure that I have mobile phone coverage. There's probably a map that shows me what that will look like. And I get so many calls or so many hours worth of calls, or I get texts, or I get data coverage, whatever it happens to be. And again, this is just a good exercise to just go through and identify, well, what are the elements of the contract? How do they play out? You could pick almost any type of contract and think about that. You will see in one of the past exams, students were asked to unpick what the process is for buying a coffee at a cafe in Building 80, which, what steps of the process are which part of the contractual formation. So let's see what I've got here. We'll just skip through that. And you'll see with this slide pack with all of these questions, I haven't given you fully formed answers or anything. Oh, that ticking's now going to be really annoying. But I've just given you different kinds of notes. Another question you might look at here in something like this is capacity. But again, questions like that help you show off. All right, who wants to pick something?
Smart.
I do like Max. All right. Max and a company called Chaos Limited entered into an agreement under which Max agreed to lease certain premises from Chaos for 4 years. The lease contained the following written clause. Chaos may at any time during the currency of the term terminate this lease by giving at least 4 weeks' notice in writing of its intention to do so to Max. Max asked Chaos's representative at the time that the contract was signed, why is this clause included? The rep said, we don't own the premises, so we need this clause just in case the head lessor requires us to vacate. Less than 4 years later, Chaos purported to terminate the lease pursuant to the termination clause. The head lessor hadn't required Chaos to vacate. Advise Max at common law. Okay, let's unpick this question for. What are you advising Max about? It looked like you were speaking, Rita, but I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I said express terms.
The express terms. What are the terms of the contract? So just even coming back, just being able to identify in an exam question, who am I advising? I'm advising Max. So I'm advising the tenant here, not the landlord. The tenant is trying to kick Max out. So one of the first things we're going to assume here is that Max, if Max is seeking advice, Max doesn't want to be kicked out. So the next thing I would think to do is work out, well, what are the terms of the contract? And is there something in that exchange that means that Chaos is prohibited or restricted in some way from exercising that clause because the head lessor hadn't told them to vacate? Does this remind you of any other cases?
Wait.
Hoyts, absolutely. It's almost word for word a summary of Hoyts with the names changed. So what happened in Hoyts?
The who was it who wanted to lease the space, and they said it was pretty much exactly the same. They had a clause in there in case the head lessor wanted the space back. And then, but hang on, in that case, didn't the head lessor want the space back?
No, didn't actually.
On the detail.
What happened at the end though? So what did they argue in that case to start off with? Stephen, you're talking and it might not be to us. No, shake your head if it's not to us. You're muted.
Probably best that I'm muted.
Ah.
I can't remember the details of the case. It's driving me insane. So I knew it.
Oh, don't be silly. You were a little insane beforehand. People coming and going in this class, it's quite strange, all that doorbell ringing. Okay, so in that case, they argued this idea that there was a collateral contract. So that by effectively saying we only need this clause in case the head lessor exercises their rights, they were promising that they would only exercise their rights under that clause if the head lessor asked them to. So that was the argument. Were they successful? Could Max argue, you can't kick me out now because you promised that you would only exercise your rights under that clause if in a particular set of circumstances, and that particular set of circumstances hasn't happened?
Was that in writing though, Kath? Was that included in the contract? Because I think...
No, they did not have it in writing.
Wouldn't the parole evidence sort of come into play in that then?
I think parole evidence rule is a really good way of thinking about it. I think you'll get to the same result. So what would the parole evidence rule tell you?
I think just top of my head, it is basically where if it's not included in the contract, I think it's something to do with the extrinsic evidence. I think if it's not included in the contract, then it's not actually admissible in court.
Yeah. So now we've got, and this is a lease, so it relates to land. So we've got a formalities requirement that we have it in writing anyway. And the parole evidence rule says you can't bring in evidence that would vary, whether that's in adding to or moving, change in any way, or deviate from what's in writing. You can't bring in oral evidence. So, and that oral evidence would change the meaning of the contract. Instead of having a broad right, we can kick you out by giving you 4 weeks notice, it would become a restricted right. We can give you 4 weeks notice if the landlord says we can. And whether we approach it from the parole evidence point of view or from the collateral contract approach, so with a collateral contract also needs to be consistent with the main contract. So if this side contract varied the main contract, then it's not a collateral contract, it's a different arrangement. And we have something in writing that trumps it. So, and this discussion was made beforehand. So, but there's sometimes we see circumstances where statements are made at the time that the contract's entered into, which can create something new, a new term. Can you think of an example? What about the White Ant case, Van den Eschet? So with the Van den Eschet and can't remember the name, that was the case where they were just about to buy a house. Somebody's just about to buy a house. They're almost about to sign this form and they say, oh, I didn't get a pest inspection. And the vendor says, oh, don't worry about that. If there were any white ants here, I would have got rid of them. They sign the contract, they change hands. A few months later, they
included.
Sorry?
That clause was included, I'm pretty sure.
And the clause was included, yeah, because they looked at the timing of the statement. So, and they said that the statement was an inducement. But it's difficult because it's a term that's not in writing, that is different from the terms that are in writing, although it really adds to them rather than varies. It's sort of an additional warranty. But even so, but a term like this would vary. It actually is contradictory to the rights that are in the original term. So I think the short answer here is, sorry, Max, you're going to have a problem. Any other comments, concerns, frustrations? Just trying to see what else is in here. Not relevant to this course. One of the other things to do, a lot of you will do this, I really don't want you to, but you might, is you will look at something and you will have knowledge, you know, about leases or about something else like telecommunications or something, and you'll start to tell me something else you know about the law as it relates to retail leases or whatever, which is, it's like, it's great that you know that, and in class it's time to have that conversation, but in your contract exam is not the time to talk about anything other than contract. All right, I think we've got time to do one more. Anybody want to go for something? You do realise you don't know whether they're difficult ones or easy ones just by looking at. Which one? Red Bull. That's probably the only ones you can guess easily. What are the differences between an offer, an invitation to treat, and a mere puff? And can you use some case law to cite this or to explain it? Some of you down there being very quiet where I can't see you. What about you, Scott? Actually, you can't, you know, you can only type, can't you? Throw me in an answer, Scotty. You're muted again, Steve. Oh, but you might be talking to someone else.
Yeah, no, just touching base with Sigrid on it. Invitation to treat we covered in the last question, so that was the chemist one.
Yep, Boots. Got a couple of other flick knife case. So that's Fisher and Bell.
Fisher and Bell, yeah.
And probably the third case is Partridge and Crittenden.
That's the one.
Bramble, Finch, Cocks and Hens. It just amuses me that it's the guy's name's Partridge and he sells the Bramble Finches. So how is an invitation to treat different from an offer? Scott, he didn't share it with everybody, but with me, he's just said it's a bit like an auction. An auction's a good example of it. It's when you invite someone to make an offer. But you're effectively, it's a little more than that. Usually with an invitation to treat, you are signalling these are the terms on which I'll do business. If you make me an offer on these terms, I'll accept it. But if I'm a chemist and the law says that I have to supervise your acquisition of the drugs, I'll make sure that you've got a prescription or, you know, that you're old enough or whatever. And if I'm selling cigarettes or booze or petrol or fireworks or porn or whatever it is, I might be choosy about who my purchasers are. Or I might not, but I have that right. So an offer, so if we're inviting people to make an offer, what is an offer? Can anybody just give me a sentence that explains what an offer is?
It's a statement made that if it's accepted on its terms, will give rise to a binding contract.
Exactly. So an offer needs to encapsulate all the deal. I know it's a bit of a gross analogy, but I still think of the offer as being the egg. So, and all we need is one little sperm to hit it and we conceive our agreement. From that point, we have an agreement. But an offer itself is not an agreement, but it needs to encapsulate all of the DNA. So it needs to include the consideration. It needs to have certainty. It needs to demonstrate intention. There's that really nice quote from the American scholar that was in one of the really early slide packs, might even be our first, if not our second week, that says that an offer basically signals to somebody that all you need to do is accept and we have the deal. So what's a puff then?
Example would be in the Pepsi case.
Or even, that's why it's Red Bull there.
Oh, right.
So an example, so when we're talking about what a puff is a statement that is puffed up. It's intended to be advertising that there is, nobody would really expect it to be true. And what's our key case on what a puff is? The Pepsi case would work. It's an American case though.
Would that be Carlisle?
Yeah. So what was purportedly a puff in Carlisle?
That would be the, I think they said that nobody was expected to actually.
Giving the £1,000.
Yes.
That wasn't a puff, was it?
100.
It wasn't found to be a puff in the end, but they argued that it was a puff.
Right.
And the reason for that was such an outrageous amount of money that they were offering. They said, well, nobody would really believe that was true. But the court said, well, actually, no, the way you did it, particularly saying that you had put £1,000 into the bank to show your sincerity in the matter, means you've kind of cut off your ability to argue that it was a puff. So, and again, in my head, I think of that advertising for cold and flu medication, which I have managed to resist this semester, although God knows why, because I really have not been well. But imagine you're soldiering on, and if you go to work and you sneeze, we will give you $100,000. Now that would be a puff. You take our medicine, you sneeze at work, we'll give you $100,000. That seems like a puff, right? But if it was, we'll give you $100,000, and to show our sincerity about this, we have put $1 million in the bank just in case we have to pay. It might move away from being a puff. But, I'm using those outrageous numbers because actually the amount of money in Carlisle was significant. It was a significantly large amount of money in real terms at the time.
So one question.
Yes, Aisha.
The one is, when you want to buy something, all the advertisement in the internet, they say, to make this is really true, we give you 30-day money back guarantee.
Yeah.
So could we take that as a real offer?
You can take it as a real offer. Absolutely. And the Electronic Transactions Act, and we've spoken about this in different times, basically, and the way that the consumer law works says if you're trying to engage in business with people in Australia, then the laws of Australia apply. How realistic it would be to find those people and sue them if they are not telling the absolute truth to you, I don't know. So again, it could still be enforceable. It could be an enforceable promise, but just because it is an enforceable promise doesn't necessarily mean that it's practical to enforce it. And there's been quite a lot recently with people who've been caught in internet scams, which is quite distressing for them. So again, I would probably tread with caution from time to time. Okay, we're pretty much at 7:30.
I know we're at 7:30, but there's one more little icon you've got there that really symbolises where I'm at. I was hoping you'd go through it. It's lost in space.
Ah, well, that's a nice little question.
Time to touch that one.
Yeah, why not? One more. Is everybody? Whoops, sorry, I just got to go back. Go there. So you can sort of see how when this works. But lost in space. Danger, Will Robinson. Now the problem question. Dr. Smith, recently discussed the purchase of a small farm on the south coast of Victoria with his friend Will Robinson, who's only ever used the house as a holiday house in the past, or the property as a holiday house. Will said he would accept a 10% deposit for the purchase. Dr. Smith explained that he needed to take possession immediately as he had nowhere else to live. And no time was there any document signed. Dr. Smith paid the deposit and Will gave him the keys. The next day, Dr. Smith moved in. Dr. Smith quickly began various home improvements, building a secret laboratory for building robots and establishing a vineyard on the premises. Will now wants Dr. Smith to leave the farm. Can you? I think we're advising Will. Okay, Steve, over to you. Where do you start advising Will? You're the one who wanted to be lost in space.
Yeah, I am lost in space. I know there's the case where the farm where he moved in made the renovations, and I can't remember the outcome.
Anybody there able to help him?
Nope.
We're just looking now. I have the brain trust Sigrid scrounging for.
No, that's all right. We're studying.
I know Rita knows. So.
Sure.
Hi, Rita.
I was thinking that in the relevant case, which I don't actually remember the name of, wasn't it?
Okay, can I help you with that? I'll give you Beaton and McDivitt as a start. But go on.
Found that it was just things done in reliance on a promise, and that's different to. Was that a consideration case?
It rings a bell now. Can't remember.
And it was found. Well, let's say we
In
take
preparation, I think.
Yeah, and then so in that case, if we applied it to this analogy, well then Will would have to leave the farm.
So, well, let's work out what are the issues. No. Well, what are the issues here? We've got a case that is very similar, Beaton and McDivitt. We'll come back to that. What issues do you see, even before, that could arise in relation to this question?
Well, it's land and there's nothing in writing.
Land and nothing in writing, absolutely. What else? Is there anything else?
And reliance on a promise.
So expand on that for me. Tell me what's the reliance?
Well, he's made renovations in the promise that they would fulfil the agreement.
That certainly happened in Beaton and McDivitt. What do you see in the facts here that leads you to that? He did it.
He's made renovations and now he's being asked to leave. It was on the on the premise.
So the promise he's relying on is that you pay the balance of the purchase price and it's your farm or your property, so you can do what you like with it.
Yeah.
Okay? So with the Beaton and McDivitt, you might distinguish that slightly because he was actually asked to do, whichever one it was who was on the farm was asked to use permaculture to work the land, and the promise was that it would be transferred to the person on the land when the zoning regulations changed. But then they had a fight about Tai Chi. So of course it all fell apart. I'm just having a look at my notes here to see if there's anything. What about intention? Is there anything that stands out there that might be relevant for intention? I don't think it's likely to be a big issue, but it's worth pointing out.
Payment of the deposit and the giving the keys says there was an intention to be bound.
So
you've got to consider.
So I guess what I was going to is here that they're friends.
Okay.
So could it be a social relationship of some sort? That could be relevant here. Again, but we know from Ermogenes and other cases that that's pretty easily dealt with. What else have we got? Sorry, I'm looking all over the place because I can't remember what I was saying. What about certainty? Certainty and consideration. Can we identify what the price is?
we're not told the price, but we know that he's paid 10%. So we know that there has to be, if you've paid 10%, there is a definite amount.
Absolutely. So it's not for us to do the maths, but if they've agreed that whatever he paid represents 10%, then we know he owes 9 times that amount at the end of the day. Let me just bring you over. I'm just trying to see. So this one is actually, it's a good idea to just pull out in an exam, sort of doing it this way, work out, well, what are the issues? That's why these are very blunt instruments, these quick and dirty ones. You'll often find more in your discussion as you're thinking about it than the things I've highlighted. And don't think that just because you're going through these and I've sort of given some headlines, if you come up with an issue in an exam that I didn't think about, when I wrote the notes supporting the questions, I will definitely pay attention to that issue. And, you know, sometimes everybody sees something that I didn't see. So the last one, for example, is a good example of that, because when I wrote the problem, that was the max and chaos problem, and I've got the Hoyt's case in front of me, I was thinking about collateral contracts. But almost always when people answer that one, they end up with it being a formalities question. And that makes sense. We get the same result, actually, but it makes sense. Our biggest issue here is the statute of frauds, or Section 126 of the Instruments Act, that a court won't enforce. So the question then becomes whether there's reliance in some way. Similarly, even though you can distinguish McDivitt, Beaton and McDivitt on the facts, ultimately there is, there's less reliance here. And again, good lesson for you with your clients, don't hand over the keys until all of the money is paid. I had a friend recently who bought a house from someone and the vendors didn't move out. So she was on holidays at the time that the transfer was supposed to happen. She said to them, oh, yeah, it doesn't matter to me if you take another couple of days to move out. And they were still there 6 weeks later. So these things happen. All right, so this pack, you can see how it works. You hit on a problem, it'll give you a problem. It'll give you some time to just scratch out an answer. And then it will give you some clues as to what that answer might be. You can have a bit of fun with it, play at home with friends or by yourself. Fun for the whole family. And it just gives you another way of doing some practice questions.
Just a general question.
Sure.
So basically, when we get a problem, so we have 4 questions, and basically we're just trying to go in depth, tackle every area that we can to get as many marks as we can.
Yeah, basically. I want you to try and answer the question. Try and answer the question up front, but do set out, well, what are the issues that you see? What's the rules that apply to that issue or each of those issues? How would you apply them? What conclusion do you end up with? If you can see an issue but you're not sure what the rule is, put it down anyway. Okay, do everything you can to get marks. Sorry, what was that, Ken?
I said, would scattergunning be useful in terms of identification of issues?
I can usually tell if you're just throwing everything down. So, yes, show me that you can see lots of different issues, but link them to the facts. Yeah. So don't just have a list of issues that could apply to any problem. Tell me why you think it's an issue for this problem, and you will be rewarded for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, and I'm not expecting the same level of depth as I would in an assignment. You don't have as much time, right? You don't have nearly as much time. I'm much more interested in how you think than anything else. But I will be back here same time next week. I'm doing Run for the Fireys next Sunday. So, you know, my feet might be on ice. There's a big hill there that I have to run up at some point. But that means I should have lots of good endorphins going through my body, and I'll be quite helpful to you, I hope. But I will be here same time next week. And then for the face-to-face people. You'll have your exam a couple of days after that. In the meantime, if you need time with me, I do have a very busy week. I'm at a conference, but that link will help you book a time with me, or you can send me a text message or try my phone. I'm not too hard to get hold of. Okay? Don't stress. It'll all be good.
Thank you, Kath.
Okay.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one, guys.
Right.
Thank you.